What if I told you that one of the largest, wealthiest countries on Earth is almost entirely empty? A nation the size of the United States, yet most of its people live in a handful of cities hugging the ocean's edge. Behind the postcard beaches and glittering skylines lies an immense, silent void. 95% of the continent, untouched and uninhabited. Why? Why is almost all of Australia deserted? Tonight, we reveal the truth behind the world's emptiest country. A story of nature's brutality, human survival, and the secrets that shaped a nation. Number 1. The harsh heart of the continent Australia. A land so vast it could swallow Western Europe whole. From above, it's breathtaking. Deep red sands, sunburnt plains, and winding rivers that appear only after rare storms. But behind the beauty lies an unforgiving truth. Most of this land simply refuses to support life. 2/3 of the Australian continent is classified as arid or semi-arid. That means almost no rainfall, relentless heat, and soils so poor they can barely grow grass, let alone crops. In the central regions, places like the Simpson Desert, the Gibson Desert, and the Great Victoria Desert, daytime temperatures soar above 45 degrees Celsius. Water evaporates faster than it falls. Even underground aquifers are deep, saline, and unstable. When early European settlers arrived in the 1800s, they believed they could conquer this emptiness. They sent expeditions deep inland, men like Burke and Wills, who dreamed of crossing the continent from south to north. But the desert swallowed them. Horses collapsed, water dried up, and entire teams vanished in the red dust. The lesson was brutal and clear. Nature ruled Australia, not the other way around. Even today, satellite imagery shows a giant dead heart in the middle of the continent, a space where life bends to the will of the climate. This harshness defines why 95% of the land remains empty, because survival here isn't just difficult, it's almost impossible. Number 2. Where people actually live. The coastal bubble. If you draw a ring around Australia's coastline, you'll find nearly all of its population packed inside that thin border. From Sydney to Melbourne, Brisbane to Perth. The entire human story of modern Australia unfolds within a narrow coastal strip. It's as if 26 million people are clinging to the edges of an island continent too harsh to inhabit. The reasons go beyond comfort. They're about geography and survival. The coastal regions are blessed with rainfall, fertile soils, and temperate weather. The East Coast in particular, the Great Dividing Range, traps moisture from the Pacific, feeding lush forests and reliable rivers. Cities like Sydney and Brisbane thrive here because they sit where land and life meet perfectly. But move just 200 kilometers inland and everything changes. The air dries, the vegetation thins, rivers vanish into sand. This sudden shift, from green to red, from life to emptiness, is one of Australia's most dramatic natural boundaries. Historically, Indigenous Australians adapted perfectly to this contrast. For over 60,000 years, they lived across every corner of the continent, surviving through deep knowledge of the land and its rhythms. But when Europeans arrived, they clustered where the conditions matched home, the coasts. They built farms, ports, and cities by the sea, turning their backs on the burning heart of the country. That decision, born from logic and survival, set the pattern that defines Australia even today. A nation concentrated on the edges, with a vast wilderness untouched beyond the horizon. Number 3. The myths of the empty land. To truly understand why 95% of Australia is empty, we have to ask, empty for whom? Because for tens of thousands of years, this land was anything but vacant. Indigenous Australians developed complex societies, languages, and trade routes across regions Europeans later dismissed as wastelands. When the British colonized Australia in 1788, they declared it terra nullius, land belonging to no one. It was a convenient myth that justified taking land without treaties or recognition. But the reality was very different. There were thriving communities in the deserts, the tropics, and even the Outback plains, each adapted to their environment through ingenuity. So, when we say 95% empty, we're really speaking from a modern, urban perspective. From satellites, the land looks lifeless, but to those who know it, it's full of stories, sacred sites, and deep cultural meaning. However, as colonization expanded, indigenous populations were pushed out or forced into missions and settlements near the coast. Entire regions that once supported human life became symbolically erased, painted as barren, forgotten, uninhabited. This mindset still echoes in modern Australia. We speak of remote areas, the outback, or the bush, terms that imply distance, danger, and isolation. But for many, these places are home. The myth of emptiness, born from colonization, became self-fulfilling. Governments and investors ignored the interior, funneling resources toward the coasts. The outback became a symbol. Vast, mysterious, but economically invisible. So, while the maps call it empty, the truth is more complex. It's not the land that's empty, it's the attention we give it that is. Number 4, the climate and economy divide. Here's another secret behind Australia's emptiness. It's not just about geography, it's about economics. Australia's wealth lives along the coast, where ports, tourism, and global trade thrive. The interior, despite holding rich mineral deposits, simply doesn't offer the infrastructure to sustain big populations. Mining towns like Kalgoorlie, Roxby Downs, and Mount Isa rise briefly in the desert, then fade once the resources dry up. They are modern echoes of the gold rush era, temporary flashes of prosperity in an otherwise desolate expanse. But imagine trying to build a city here, transporting water hundreds of kilometers, maintaining roads under 50-degree heat, and generating power across empty distances. The costs would be astronomical. Even agriculture struggles. Large cattle stations stretch across thousands of square kilometers, yet employ only a handful of people. Climate change is making it worse. The dry regions are getting even drier, with prolonged droughts crippling rural towns. Dust storms, bushfires, and floods all occur in cycles, making permanent expansion inland a dangerous gamble. And yet, there's irony in this emptiness. The very same barren landscapes that repel settlement are the reason Australia thrives economically. They hide iron ore, gold, lithium, and uranium, resources that power the nation's exports. So while few live there, those empty spaces quietly fuel the entire economy. The divide is clear. The coast lives off comfort and connection, the interior off isolation and extraction. Together they define Australia, a country balanced between life and wilderness, civilization and silence. Number 5, the future of the empty continent. So, will Australia ever fill its emptiness? That's the question scientists, politicians, and dreamers have asked for decades. There have been visions of inland utopias. From the 1950s Snowy Mountains hydro scheme to modern proposals for solar cities in the outback. But the same barriers remain: distance, cost, and climate. Even with technology, water remains the ultimate limitation. Desalination plants could theoretically bring ocean water inland, but the energy cost is immense. And the social reality is that most Australians simply don't want to move inland. The cities offer jobs, education, and lifestyle. Everything the deserts cannot. Still, some progress is happening. Renewable energy farms are rising across the outback, harnessing endless sunlight and open land. New Indigenous-led conservation projects are reclaiming and protecting ancient territories, giving life to regions once labeled uninhabitable. These efforts hint at a new kind of occupation, one that doesn't fight the land but works with it. Perhaps the future of Australia's emptiness isn't about filling it with people, but about rediscovering its purpose. Because maybe that's the final truth. Australia doesn't need to be full to be valuable. its vastness, its silence, its wilderness. They are what make it unique. In a crowded world, Australia's emptiness might just be its greatest treasure. Number 6. The hidden system. Why Australia's emptiness is no accident. When you look at a map of Australia, it almost feels like someone drew an invisible circle and told people, live only here. The truth is, this pattern of emptiness isn't just because of nature. It's also because of policy, profit, and control. For decades, Australia's government and corporate elite have quietly maintained systems that make it nearly impossible for ordinary people to populate the interior regions, even if they wanted to. Let's start with the land ownership structure. Around 60% of Australia's total landmass is classified as leasehold land, meaning it's technically owned by the government, but leased to private entities, mainly for agriculture or mining. These leases are often held by massive corporations, not citizens. The outback that seems empty isn't really unused. It's controlled by companies that use it for profit: cattle grazing, resource extraction, or long-term mineral exploration. And these areas, while rich in resources, are isolated from real infrastructure. The few small towns that exist are completely dependent on government aid or corporate funding to survive. Now, here's the twist. The government has no strong incentive to change that. You see, keeping the population centered around coastal megacities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane creates economic concentration. That means less money is spent on rural infrastructure, fewer roads, hospitals, or power grids, and more money flows into coastal property markets, where real estate prices are among the highest in the world. The system feeds itself. Cities grow richer and denser, while the interior remains untouched and dependent. Then there's the foreign investment factor, a subject that rarely makes headlines. In the last 2 decades, foreign companies, especially from China, the UK, and the US, have bought or leased millions of hectares of Australian farmland. Some of these areas are as large as entire European countries. On paper, these deals seem like normal business, but in reality, they tighten control over land use. Local communities can't expand into these territories because they're legally restricted, fenced off, and managed by corporate interests that prioritize resource extraction over habitation. This creates a bizarre irony. Australians live in a country with one of the lowest population densities on Earth, yet vast portions of their own land are off-limits. Even when government initiatives talk about developing the outback, most of it remains just talk. Projects like Northern Australia Development or Inland Rail sound promising, but they face 2 unspoken challenges: climate risk and cost efficiency. Maintaining basic services, electricity, water, healthcare, across desert regions costs far more per person than in cities. That's why policymakers quietly avoid any real push for inland settlement. It's easier to let those lands remain wild, empty, and extractive, rather than habitable. But there's also something deeper: a psychological and cultural element. Over time, Australians themselves have come to see the outback as a place of danger, mystery, and desolation. The desert, the red sand, the burning heat, all of it became part of the national myth. Films, stories, and even school curriculums romanticize the wilderness as something to be respected, but not lived in. This subtle conditioning plays a huge role. Generations grow up believing the heart of their country is untamable, and so they never question why no one lives there. It's not just geography that keeps people away. It's mindset, built on decades of narrative reinforcement. And behind this mindset lies strategic advantage. Keeping 95% of the land sparsely inhabited means fewer people to protest when new mines open, when nuclear waste storage is proposed, or when military bases are expanded. The emptiness itself becomes a tool, a buffer zone that allows for industrial activity, secretive testing, and national defense without public interference. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a logical setup that benefits those in control. The fewer people who live inland, the easier it is to use it as an invisible economic engine. Imagine if even 10% of Australia's population moved into the center. Entire new towns would emerge, agriculture would expand, and regional economies would explode. But that shift would also redistribute power, politically and economically. City elites and developers would lose their grip on real estate, and new industries would rise outside the old centers of influence. That's not something the system wants. So, quietly, it continues the cycle. Keep the coast crowded and the interior forgotten. At the end of the day, the emptiness of Australia isn't just an accident of geography. It's the result of a carefully sustained balance between control, economics, and perception. The government benefits from centralization, corporations profit from resource monopoly, and the population is conditioned to accept it all as natural. But if you zoom out, you see the pattern. An entire continent designed to stay mostly empty, not by fate, but by choice. Conclusion: the revelation beneath the silence. When we look at Australia's map, we see a contradiction. A giant land almost empty, yet full of meaning. A place where ancient cultures thrived, where modern cities glow along fragile coasts, and where the heart of the continent beats quietly beneath the desert sun. The truth is, 95% of Australia isn't just empty. It's misunderstood. It's not a failure of civilization, but a reflection of balance between what humans can control and what nature will always command. So next time someone says, Australia is empty, remember, emptiness is only what you see when you stop looking for life.